College Station, Texas has a little over 120,000 people in it. On a fall Saturday, more than 100,000 people can pack into Kyle Field at once. For a few hours, one building can nearly match the population of the town around it. That is not normal, and it is not unique to College Station. All over America, there are college towns where the stadium is bigger than the city. The football program is the main economic engine, and 7 Saturdays a year can shape local life more than the other 358 days combined. Tuscaloosa, Athens, State College, South Bend. These are not places that happen to grow into football towns. In a lot of cases, the football stadium came first, and the town built itself around it. Some of these places are barely towns at all in the ordinary sense. They're college campuses with a small city wrapped around them, kept alive year-round by one institution and one sport. So how did that happen? And more importantly, does the economic magic people talk about actually hold up? Let's get into it. Start with the numbers, because they are almost absurd once you actually line them up. The typical stadium in a major college town seats around 60,000 people, with many pushing past 80,000. Kyle Field, for example, seats more than 100,000 and has hosted crowds above that mark. Compare that to the towns themselves. College Station sits a little over 120,000, which means the stadium alone can come close to matching the town's population on game day. That mismatch is the first thing that makes college football towns feel strange. On a random Tuesday, these are quiet places. On a Saturday in October, they become some of the most crowded square miles in the country. And that is not just a problem of perception. It is a real logistical burden. Researchers who've studied these towns found that a meaningful share of major programs sit in genuinely rural communities, places with limited hospital beds and modest emergency room capacity to match the crowds they're expected to absorb. A town built for a modest student body and a few tens of thousands of residents suddenly has to absorb traffic, parking, food service, security, and medical demand for a crowd several times its own size. Then it has to do it again the next week, and the next. Most cities never have to build around a crowd that temporary and that large. College towns do it as a matter of routine. That mismatch is not a side effect of college football. It is the business model. To understand why the mismatch exists, you have to go back to how these places were built in the first place. A lot of the biggest college football brands grew up around land-grant universities, schools created in the 1800s to spread higher education across agricultural and industrial states. Many were placed in smaller towns rather than major cities on purpose. The idea was to distribute opportunity, not concentrate it. That mattered later because football exploded in popularity on those campuses in the early 20th century, long before television and long before sports became a full-scale entertainment industry. Schools built bigger and bigger stadiums as the game grew, and because the university was often the largest institution in town, the stadium naturally became the largest physical structure too. In a city, a stadium has to compete with everything else. In a college town, it often wins by default. Over time, the stadiums kept expanding, while the towns around them grew far more slowly. In a lot of these places, the gap only got wider. The town stayed relatively small. The football program became enormous. Look at the names again. Tuscaloosa holds around 100,000 residents, and Bryant-Denny Stadium alone seats more than 100,000 fans. Athens, Georgia sits at a similar size, and Sanford Stadium isn't far behind it in capacity. State College, Pennsylvania is home to barely more than 40,000 year-round residents. And Beaver Stadium can pack in over 106,000 people on a Saturday, more than double the town's entire population in a single building. These aren't outliers. Across the sport, this exact pattern repeats itself. Campus after campus, decade after decade. For local businesses, that dominance can be a blessing. Football season is not just a nice bump. For plenty of restaurants, hotels, bars, parking operators, and small shops, it is the entire year. Hotels in college towns can book out months in advance for rivalry weekends. Restaurants can do in one Saturday what they normally do in an ordinary week. National banking data shows that in the zip codes surrounding major stadiums, credit and debit card spending jumps by roughly 75% on game days, mostly in food, drink, lodging, and parking. If your business is 2 blocks from the stadium, a home schedule can be the difference between a good year and a bad one. That is why city leaders and Chamber of Commerce types love talking about football's economic impact. On the surface, the numbers are huge. Single-season estimates around some campus stadiums can reach into the tens of millions. One recent look at just 4 expanded playoff first-round host games found they generated close to $200 million in combined economic output, supported well over 1,000 jobs, and produced tens of millions in local and state tax revenue, with nearly all of it staying inside the host towns themselves. And on game day, the effect is real. People are in town, they are spending. The streets are full, the parking lots are full, the bars are full, the energy is unmistakable. But the key question is whether that activity is actually new. Here's the catch. A lot of economists say the real story is much messier. For decades, studies of college football's broader impact, work done by sports economists like Robert Bade and Victor Matheson, among others, have found that the games often do not move long-term income, employment, or overall tax growth in any meaningful way once you control for the normal ups and downs of a local economy. In some cases, a winning season can even line up with weaker per capita income in smaller towns. Why? Because a lot of game day spending is substitution, not new money. Local residents are not always spending more overall. They are just spending differently. Money that would have gone to a regular Saturday dinner or a local shop gets redirected into tailgates, tickets, and concessions. And sometimes the visitors do not spend as much locally as the brochures imply. Some bring their own food. Some drive in and leave the same night. Some never need a hotel at all. One study of Texas college towns even found that certain heated rivalry games line up with a temporary dip in local sales tax revenue, the opposite of what you'd expect from a stadium packed with visiting fans. So yes, college football absolutely creates real activity, but the net boost is often smaller and less dramatic than the hype suggests. That is the uncomfortable part. The stadiums are huge, the crowds are real, and the weekends are chaotic, but the long-term economics are harder to prove than the slogans make them sound. The money is real. The question is whether it is new. If the economics are shaky, why do schools keep making the stadiums bigger? Because they are trying to make the buildings work all year. For most of their history, college football stadiums sat empty almost every day of the year. 7 home games, maybe 8, and then silence for the other 350-plus days. Massive facilities, sometimes costing hundreds of millions of dollars to build or renovate, sitting dark and unused for the vast majority of the calendar. That never made much financial sense. So schools changed the playbook. Modern stadiums are increasingly designed to host concerts, graduations, high school games, special events, and premium hospitality experiences that have nothing to do with the team on the field. The goal is simple. If the stadium is going to be one of the biggest structures in town, it should not only exist for 8 Saturdays a year. That turns the building into something bigger than a football venue. It becomes a year-round asset. And once you think that way, the whole design philosophy changes. At the same time, some programs are doing something that sounds backwards at first. They are getting smaller on purpose, not because they want less revenue, because they want better revenue. A smaller stadium with more premium seating, more clubs, and more hospitality inventory can sometimes out-earn a much larger venue packed with ordinary seats. One well-documented example involved a temporary stadium seating a small fraction of its predecessor's capacity that still pulled in roughly 4 times the revenue, almost entirely on premium seating and hospitality packages. The seats at the edge of the field are not the main product anymore. The premium spaces are. Luxury boxes, club seating, donor sections, and hospitality packages all bring in much more money per fan than a standard ticket does. So the stadium becomes less about maximum attendance and more about maximum yield. That is great for revenue. It is not always great for the people who built the tradition. Long-time season ticket holders are getting priced out. The ordinary fan can still show up, but the economics of access are changing. A stadium optimized purely for revenue does not necessarily look like the stadium that made the town famous in the first place. The building still fills up, but who it is built for is changing. Zoom out and you start to see how completely some of these towns have fused their identity with a single football program. Tourism boards market cities around the game day calendar. City officials talk about stadium expansions like they are infrastructure projects, discussed in the same meetings as roads and water systems. University leaders describe the football stadium as one of the most visible and valuable things the institution does. A claim that would sound bizarre coming from the head of a school built to educate students, until you actually spend a fall Saturday in one of these towns and see exactly what they mean. That would sound strange in almost any other context, but in a college town, it makes sense. The stadium is not just where the game happens. It is where the town performs its identity in public. The Friday night arrival, the Saturday crowd, the march to the stadium, the tailgates, the traffic, the noise, the post-game restaurants, all of it becomes part of the town's brand. And once a place leans that heavily on football, the incentives start feeding themselves. A bigger stadium brings bigger crowds. Bigger crowds justify more spending. More spending justifies more expansion. More expansion justifies higher prices. Higher prices push the experience further toward premium buyers. Premium buyers expect more amenities. The cycle repeats. Conference realignment has only made that pressure worse. As television money flows toward a smaller number of mega conferences, the programs anchoring these towns have every incentive to keep expanding, keep monetizing, and keep turning the stadium into a year-round asset. Fall behind on facilities and a program risks falling behind on recruiting. Fall behind on recruiting and it risks falling out of the conferences where the real television money actually lives. The alternative is falling behind. So the story is not just that some college towns have giant stadiums, it is that the stadiums help define the towns. The towns learn to depend on the stadiums, and now both are locked into a system that rewards bigger crowds, higher prices, and more use from the same building. A town of 100,000 people can fit another 100,000 inside a single stadium on Saturday. For a few hours, the building becomes the center of everything. Traffic reroutes around it. Businesses depend on it. The town's identity bends toward it. Local governments plan road closures and staffing schedules for months, around 8 dates on a calendar. And in some places, it has done that for so long that nobody really remembers what the town was supposed to be without it. That is the real twist. College football did not just find a home in these towns. In a lot of cases, it built the town's entire identity around itself, one Saturday at a time. And by the time people noticed, the stadium was no longer just the biggest building in town. It had become the reason the town made sense at all.